All right, to start, little poll here. How many folks in here consider themselves to be engineers of some kind or another? Look at that. Look at that. Do we have any landscape architects in here? Okay, so that was the first problem I had when I got into this scan project. I don't know, second question, how many are familiar with the scan program that's run under the NCHRP program? Okay, a few, but probably not nearly as many as are familiar with the research studies, reports, and whatnot, or even the synthesis reports that are produced to help us do our work. Domestic scan program is run as an NCHRP project, and then under that, they will fund different scan studies. They go through probably a similar proposal process as research studies. So I'm going to say a little bit about the domestic scan program because before I got into it, I knew nothing about it, and I suspect that's some of your situation. They say, and this is right from their website, they want to look at innovative practices. You put in a proposal for what you think is a problem and where there's innovative work going on. Obviously, it's about sharing information and technology. You identify action items, issue a summary report. The team, 8 to 12 members. I highlight AASHTO member agencies, DOTs, but other people are brought in as needed. And there's two key people on that committee, the chairman, of course, and then someone called a subject matter expert. And that's just what the title says. And those two people keep things moving along, and at least in our case, it was the subject matter expert who wrote up the final report. And it was a very big report. The process starts out with, conference calls. There was one face-to-face meeting, and then the real work takes place. I guess originally the team would go out for 1 to 2 weeks and travel around to a handful, 5, 6, 7, what they call host agencies. Agencies that were identified as doing good work that we thought we could learn from. I think more recently, the logistics of that, as you can imagine, get pretty hairy. It's exhausting for the scan team, traveling from one city to another every couple of days. So ours was done as a peer exchange, and instead of going out to the host agencies doing the work, we brought them to us, and that was a good way to do things. And then issue the final report. I'll say that 1 week meeting we had was exhausting. It was a lot worse than going to work every day. It was tough. I just want to contrast that a little bit with the synthesis reports because this came up on a different topic the other day, and I asked someone, well, how does this differ? So I was told, and I went to the website, and synthesis reports on current knowledge and practice. They develop a compendium. It's not, you're not including big chunks of a design manual or anything. And the work's done by a consultant. So I think there's a couple of big differences right there to keep in mind. A synthesis is done by a consultant reaching out to DOTs. The scan team are primarily DOT people doing the work. And I would say that each approach has its pros and cons. Certainly as a participant, it was a great experience. It really was. The official name of this project, it was Domestic Scan 16-02, Leading Landscape Design Practices for Cost-Effective Roadside Water Management. And I highlighted the word landscape for a very good reason. Jennifer Terra, who was our chairman, she also, I think, prepared the proposal, and she's a landscape architect. And we have, I'm sure all of your agencies have LSAs working. I don't know how closely you work with any of them. We have a few at MaineDOT. I don't work with them at all. But I think one thing I learned, a takeaway for me, and it didn't make it into the formal findings and recommendations, but if you're doing serious stormwater work, especially green infrastructure, low impact development, you need an interdisciplinary team, and the LSAs have to be a big part of it. I'm used to the idea of interdisciplinary teams. I don't work in the design section. I work in the environmental office, and I'm working every day with our biologists and then our environmental specialists who are putting together permit applications and things like that. So, but I suspect maybe for someone working in project development, churning out designs, it might be a little different experience. But that was, and I suppose in the back of my mind I knew this, but to spend a week with probably a team, half of which were engineers and half LSAs, it was an eye-opener and very educational for me. Here's the SCAN team. By the time we finished, probably the team was a little smaller than the 8 to 12 that the program identifies as being ideal. The program is run by a consulting firm in New Jersey, Aurora, and they coordinate everything and they drive the process. They've been doing it for years, so they do a great job, and things happen the way they're supposed to, thanks to them. The company's called Aurora. Harry Capers was the principal, and I think he's retired from New Jersey DOT, and he was their chief engineer. He did a lot with their bridges. And then Melissa Jiang worked for him. The geographic coverage, you can see the distribution there of the team members as well as the host agencies. And these were the agencies we reached out to and invited to come to us and share their work with us, okay? So the green, I believe, are the team members, and the orange were the host agencies, the people who brought their experiences to us. A little bit of overlap, but not too much. I suppose, you know, that you can only involve so many people in this process. And so we're a big country, and you're never going to get a perfect distribution of geography, experience, whatever you're looking for. So you see that big swath down the middle of the country where we didn't have anybody. Okay. So there's I'm a little confused on the slides here, I'm sorry. So there's the geographic coverage, and that's our team. We had a peer exchange meeting, and this was where the real work took place. And it was a full week in San Diego. Lovely place to have a meeting, especially if you live in Maine and it's November. It was good. It was very good. So these were the host agencies we brought in. By going to one location, we could see more people than if we had to go around to every location, hopscotching the country. So we had 7 state DOTs, 5 city, county, or regional agencies. I must say, the Nevada and Arizona, anybody here from the Southwest, might as well be a different planet for someone from the wet, humid Northeast as far as what their hydrology is and the problems they have to deal with. And so it's fascinating, but you know, it's the kind of thing that I'm glad they know what to do, because I wouldn't know what to do there. But you know, then you have Maryland. Wow. And we worked hard to make sure Maryland in some capacity came, because you know, they deal with stormwater on a major basis. And a state like Maryland and Oregon and Washington, you know, consider them the leaders in both in their technology and their systems and their processes and their programs, okay? And that's who I would look to for DOT context guidance. And then we had some other regional agencies, utilities, Philadelphia, New York City. Believe it or not, in the little state of Maine, we have you know, by anybody else's standards, a small watershed, I'll call it utility district, that for legal reasons is out there. A Council of Governments from Michigan, and then King County, Washington. very advanced. They've been doing this a long time. They have a lot to offer. So I think the team succeeded in getting a strong group of contributing host agencies. Now, this is not a technical talk. So much has been written about this stuff. I only put this slide up to remind everybody that in this day and age, if you're talking about stormwater, one way or another, it's going to be green infrastructure, low impact development approaches to the best we can. And anybody who does this work for DOTs, I think you know there are some severe constraints on doing this sort of stormwater management, at least in our traditional approaches to highway development. And probably one of the biggest challenges is right-of-way. There are constraints. You know, we hate getting right-of-way, and especially to try to get right-of-way for something like stormwater, that can be a tough sell. So, but still, the guiding ideal will be green infrastructure in some way that works for transportation. Summary of initial findings. Now, we have this big fat report. I don't know if it's been finalized yet. Lucy Joyce, our subject matter expert, she had recently retired from Nevada DOT. She was a landscape architect. She took upon herself the job of preparing that thing. Now, I'll mention this subject matter expert again. It could be anybody. She happened to be a former DOT person. I suppose it would be anyone you could convince to take on the job. And I say that because these team members, all the expenses are covered for travel, lodging, everything like that. But there's no compensation. And for a DOT employee, all you have to do is get permission from your managers to participate. But if you thought you wanted somebody involved who is not a DOT employee, such as a consultant who you know does fabulous work and could really make this happen, well, you're asking them to give up some time and income. And I don't know if that would ever work. Lucy had retired, so she was just doing this because she liked to do it and thought it was a good and important thing to do. And you know, as with any sort of committee, the leadership is all the difference. And we are fortunate that Jen and Lucy were able to do this for us. We came up with a list of 8 or 10, say, key findings. I don't think any of them will strike you as being new or earth-shaking or, wow, we never knew that. But you know, I do think the value there is getting it together in one place and putting it out from the practitioner's point of view, from the point of view of what's happening on the ground, and the fact that the people who put this together are the people who are charged with doing the work. I do believe we rank these in order of importance, but really that's everybody's personal opinion, I think. I do a lot of work with, nowadays, designing for fish passage and building stream beds and culverts. And I don't consider myself a designer. I know very little about construction, but I've developed a real appreciation for the importance of building things and getting what you want. And our experience has been on the fish passage side, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's true on the stormwater side that contractors may not pay quite as much attention to features like stream beds in a culvert or stormwater treatment design elements as they might to other things they're more used to working with. So number one on the list, so construction, if I were listing this, I might put that at the top because I've become very sensitive to elevations. And I know just as in a culvert and stream beds, with these green infrastructure measures, elevations and grades and slopes are critical. Getting the right materials to build with, the soils, the gravels, whatever, critical. So construction methods and inspections, really important. And something like that may not come out in a design manual, perhaps, or in some of these NCHRP studies I'm going to reference in a minute. But you talk to people who do this, and right away their experience is telling you this is really important, and this is where things can go wrong. Maintenance, even if you build the best thing in the world, especially, and if my impression is if there's a drawback to these green infrastructure measures, maintenance could be it. Maintenance is a challenge for every DOT. I know in Maine, and I assume it's like this just about everywhere, maintenance is done with state dollars. There's no federal money. And so they are always under pressure to do more and more with less and less. And especially maintaining things like green infrastructure measures. Again, they fall outside the typical traditional maintenance duties of a DOT crew. And so getting them on board with that is a challenge. Asset management, I view that as going hand in hand with maintenance, but clearly that's going to be another key element because if nothing else, if you don't have a good asset management system, you're going to end up with some very inconsistent results on the ground. The last thing I'll mention that's highlighted here, that I highlighted, was watershed approach versus project site approach. And that's an easy, modern thinking about this issue, I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. But how you make it work in a DOT context, I'm not sure yet. Even after all that work we put in here, even after seeing all the work that's going on with TRB and NCHRP. But I suppose that's the holy grail for a lot of this work. Maintenance, as I say, and asset management, for me, they go together. There's not much more to say about that. The host agencies that came in, they gave good examples, approaches of how you go about a good maintenance program and a good asset management program. We don't have many, in Maine, we don't have many permanent BMPs in the ground right now, and it's our situation in Maine. Other places may be different, but the few that we do, they are in our asset management system, and the regional maintenance offices know what to do with them, and they're treated like maintaining any other asset in the ground. And I think we agreed that ultimately that's the attitude that you have to achieve, and it was clear from some of our discussions that that's not true everywhere. And they might be thought of differently, treated differently, and if you have that going on, you're going to have some trouble. The watershed approach, we had some good examples, case studies, and I think for long-term progress on this issue, we have to get there. I think I came away with seeing two challenges. One is how DOTs do their work, and it's still, project by project basis. And in Maine, we don't even do big projects per se, new right-of-way or anything like that. It's very rare. So, those would be our golden opportunities to really achieve something. But with our familiar, traditional, smaller projects, I don't know how we make progress on this front. The other challenge with this is even if we wanted to do something, is how you do it within the regulatory frameworks that we have to work in. And, that is such a big topic. Negotiating agreements and changes in that is difficult at best, and I don't know what else to say about that. It's going to require a real slog, a lot of hard work with a number of actors to make progress on that. I do want to point out, I felt, we spend this week together, we watershed approach, absolutely necessary, and yet I also knew at the time that this is nothing new. People have been talking about this inside and outside DOTs for a long time. I just want to point out there's a couple of these active and recently completed NCHRP studies. So Federal Highway, TRB, well aware of this. State DOTs well aware of it. Work's being done. There's some good resources there. So I suppose the contribution of the SCAN project was, we didn't invent this, obviously, but we were able to identify what we thought were some good examples, case studies, things to look at, to get ideas from. Some being done by DOTs, some by non-DOT agencies. And then design and construction sort of go together. The design piece, lots of design manuals and guides out there. Those don't need to be reinvented. Several state agencies, and I know because they're a part of this, have fabulous resources, Washington State and Oregon. So, you know, I would look for resources like that. But the construction piece, I've already discussed. Getting these things built right is key, and the same attention has to be paid to building these as to every other part of a project. I'm going to go through one of the case studies. It's not a DOT one, but this was one that they were able to actually put a price tag on and say, wow, we saved this much money by this approach. So that was helpful because part of this SCAN team, the proposal was put in as saying these things can be cost effective, and yet making that case isn't always easy. I'll leave it at that. So New York City on Staten Island. I don't know if any of you know New York City, but there's this Staten Island, which I grew up in New Jersey, and I always tell people it should have been part of New Jersey geographically, but well, we didn't get it. So it doesn't feel like any other part of the city, that's for sure. It's very residential. A lot of it's unsewered. There are undeveloped areas there. So the New York City DEP has some real problems there, dealing with the demands, failing septic systems, flooding. And so they decide to take a green infrastructure approach. And they call it the Blue Belt program. And so instead of dealing with drainage on this street or that street, they had the luxury, and this is something DOTs don't have. They could approach this thing systematically, looking at a large resource, okay? Instead of one culvert or one outfall, and that's, you know, too often that's what we're working with. So they developed a gravity-fed drainage system, lots of BMPs, green infrastructure, and they built out a separate, from the ground up, sanitary sewer system. Lots of construction, a lot of the elements in their plan that you see everywhere being used, but they were able to take this big picture perspective when they laid all this out. And here's what I want to get to. This is just for one part of the project or the whole program, but on this part of their Blue Belt program, they claim that their BMP approach saved them $6 million. Okay, so they were able to demonstrate a real dollar savings. And of course, there's all the maintenance and everything that goes with it, but still, this is what the team was trying to find and be able to back up what we want to believe, and that these things can be cost effective. And any of you who work with these things know about the usual kinds of maintenance that you have to commit to. You can't just walk away from these things. There's one other agency I want to mention, and for some of you who live in the Northeast, you might be aware of it, City of Philadelphia. They're under an EPA order. Big problem with their combined sewer system. And separating sewer systems is incredibly expensive anyway. And then in an old city like Philadelphia, you don't even want to think about it. So somehow they were able to come to an agreement that they're achieving their separation. One way or another, they have to separate stormwater from sanitary. And they're achieving their separation by removing the stormwater from the combined system. They're not developing a separate system, but they're going to use green infrastructure to basically infiltrate, manage stormwater volumes, never letting it into the sanitary system. It sounds incredibly difficult, complicated, expensive, but they're able to make the case that doing a traditional separation project just would have been unacceptable. It could not be done, could not be done. And so it's pretty exciting what they're doing. And again, they have the luxury of working on the whole system, on an identified resource, with a real economic imperative. Hearing them talk in the early stages, the way they've laid the schedule out, well, I know why they do this. Partly it was to sell it politically. You know, grab the low-hanging fruit early, notch successes. But when you look out in the long term, what they have to achieve, you know, I'm not so sure they're going to really get there, at least in the time frame and the budget they've let out. But it's really ambitious. It is new thinking for an old city like Philadelphia. It's pretty exciting. All I can say is those experiences were fascinating. The relevance to DOT practice, I don't know what it is yet. I don't know what it is. There's something there, but again, our issues are different. They have this advantage. They can focus, usually one agency focusing on a well-defined resource, and it's a little easier than what we have to deal with. I'll say a little bit. Washington DOT and Oregon DOT gave presentations, as well as Maryland. I should have listed them. Again, those are the experiences I would look to if I had to deal with the same issues in Maine. They have all the design tools ready to go. They have systems. They have programs. And their experiences should inform any DOT that finds themselves having to get into this situation and without any experience of their own. But again, this is all done for the DOTs in response to regulatory drivers. And without that, not much happens. So my closing thoughts from a small state, again, maintenance, construction, those are the things I key on. The watershed approach is great. I'm not sure where we've found that in Maine yet, though. But the challenge, getting past project-specific mentality of designing this culvert or that outfall. We don't have the in-house expertise or the leadership right now to take these approaches. And we don't have a regulatory driver kicking us in the butt. Thank you.
All right, let me thank Charles.